Welcome back, dear friends, to the Crimson Academy's course on the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf. Dear friends, this is part 2 of our overview of the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf. The Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, as mentioned, was the last major work to flow from the pen of His Holiness Bahá'u'lláh. It was written about 1 year before his death in 1892. It marks the end of 40 years of divine revelation. In the epistle, His Holiness Bahá'u'lláh quotes some of the most characteristic and celebrated passages from his own revelation and proclaims to the world clearly and without hesitation who he is and why he has come. Thus, the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf offers an extraordinary model of how to use the writings of Baha'u'lláh to teach the Bahá'í Faith, a model provided by His Holiness Baha'u'lláh himself. In Islam, as in other religions, the clergy holds a certain influence over the Muslim believers. During His Holiness Baha'u'llah's time, the clergy's power was very great. In Iraq and Iran, members of the clergy were responsible for much of the persecution the followers of Baha'u'lláh suffered. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh wrote the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf in response to the tyranny of a particular cleric, Shaykh Muhammad Taqi Najafi, in Isfahan. This sheikh's father, Shaykh Muhammad Taqi, also a powerful cleric, was a confirmed enemy of the cause of Baha'u'lláh. Many outstanding Baha'is were persecuted and a number martyred at his command. For his viciousness, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh named him the Wolf. When he died, his son, whom Baha'u'lláh called the Son of the Wolf, assumed his position of power and continued the same course of persecution. In the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh tries to convince the Shaykh to recognize his wrongdoing, to beg God's pardon and mercy, to mend his ways, and to recognize the truth of Baha'u'llah's cause. In exchange, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh promises that the Shaykh will receive a generous share from the ocean of God's forgiveness and bounty. Dear friends, in the course of his epistle or letter, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh proclaims that the source of his revelation is God. He describes the circumstances surrounding his revelation and repeats basic truths set forth elsewhere in his own teachings. He restates his identity and advances arguments that prove the truth of his cause. Unfortunately, Baha'u'llah's compelling proofs fell on deaf ears. But even though the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf is ostensibly addressed to Shaykh Muhammad Taqi Najafi, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh has another audience as well. He speaks to all of humanity, reminding us that God's great mercy and grace await those who heed the call of the Supreme Mediator, the Lord of the day of reckoning, and arise to serve His mighty cause. Dear friends, some of the themes of Baha'u'llah's entire letter are sounded with great clarity in the opening pages of the Epistle to the Wolf. They are stated directly and interwoven in prayers revealed especially on the Shaykh's behalf and are Baha'u'llah's pronouncements that God is the source of his revelation, that the Word of God is the proof of Baha'u'llah's cause, that through Baha'u'lláh unity and oneness have been revealed to humanity, and that He is the most exalted pen, the supreme mediator, as well as the dawning place of the names and the day springs of the attributes of God. that humans were created to remember God, to glorify Him, to recognize His manifestation, to be steadfast, and to aid His cause. And one's response to God's new revelation has consequences. In the prayers revealed on the Shaykh's behalf, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh lays bare the cleric's sins and describes the spiritual consequences of his actions. Despite the seriousness of the Shaykh's transgressions, God's forgiveness is always at hand. However, an act of will is needed. The Shaykh must acknowledge his wrongdoing and ask God for forgiveness. Then he must embrace His Holiness Baha'u'llah's cause and arise to promote it. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh asks God to aid the Shaykh to be fair and equitable in his judgment. Without the practice of equity and justice, there can be no order and tranquility in the world. Baha'u'lláh further advises the Shaykh to quench by the power of wisdom and the force of his utterance the enmity and hatred existing in the world. To assist them, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh restates certain teachings about justice and equity and about the purpose of the manifestations of God and religion. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh suggests that if the Shaykh were to listen to his voice, he would cast away his possessions and follow him. Baha'u'lláh describes the circumstances surrounding the birth of his revelation in the Siyah-Chal, the dungeon of Tehran. He tells how waywardness and folly among his followers were changed through the power of his word and God's grace into piety and understanding, and how weapons were converted to instruments of peace. Through the first section of this epistle, namely the first 30 pages, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh speaks beyond the Shah and beyond the Shaykh and addresses the Baha'is. He encourages them to strive that haply the tribulations suffered by this wronged one and by you in the path of God may not prove to have been in vain. As the shepherds of mankind, they have a duty to liberate their flocks from the wolves of evil passions and desires, and adorn them with the ornament of the fear of God. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh reminds them of the value of virtuous character and upright conduct, and teaches that the exercise of justice and mercy are expressed in how we treat our neighbors. Baha'u'lláh restates his claim that God is the source of his revelation and offers proof for the claim. He quotes extensively from his tablets to the kings and rulers, so that the Shaykh mayest know of a certainty that whatever hath been mentioned hath come from God. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh also expresses his hope that the Shaykh will be touched by the breezes of revelation and will arise to aid the cause of God. And by quoting such passages, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh reveals to the Shaykh the purpose of his revelation, to impart to the kings and rulers of the world that which is the cause of the well-being, the unity, the harmony, and the reconstruction of the world and of the tranquility of the nations. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh proclaims his identity and states his mission. He summons various kings and rulers to recognize him and to rise to aid his cause. Baha'u'lláh informs them of the rewards and punishments that will be meted out to them according to their response to his cause, and gives them specific advice regarding the establishment of the lesser peace and the treatment of their subjects. Baha'u'lláh also recounts his sufferings, noting their similarity to the sufferings of previous manifestations of God, describes his joy at being able to offer his life in the pathway of God, and affirms his power to prevent anyone from thwarting his mission. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh also discusses the subject of his own divinity. The clergy has accused the Babis of believing that Baha'u'lláh is God. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh denies the charge and explains the paradoxical station of the manifestations of God. He defines divinity and explains the nature of his station. Exhortations and warnings to the Baha'is appear throughout. His Baha'u'lláh cautions them against treachery, bloodshed, unfair judgments, and dissensions. During His Holiness Baha'u'llah's stay in Constantinople, his jealous and unfaithful half-brother Mirza Yahya, also known as Subh Azal, and his followers, known as Azalis, tried in various deceitful ways to stir up trouble for His Holiness Baha'u'lláh and the other Baha'is. The warnings in the Epistle against treachery are aimed at those believers who may be taken in by Yahya's scheming and plotting. At the same time, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh counsels his followers to practice trustworthiness and generosity, to use wisdom to subdue people's hearts, and to conceal the sins of others. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh restates his identity. He is the skilled, all-powerful, and inspired physician, the world reformer. His purpose is to heal humanity's ills by quickening the world and uniting all of its peoples into one universal cause, one common faith. Unlike previous manifestations of God, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh is accused of being a fomenter of discord and is prevented from applying his remedy. And like other manifestations, he is the object of lies, calumnies, and charges of falsehood. In His Holiness Baha'u'llah's case, it is Mirza Yahya and his friends, and some of whom are Baha'is who stir up trouble. In the course of several pages, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh proclaims that his actions have been known and evident unto all, and that he has aimed and striven to exalt and advance the interests of both the government and the people, and not to elevate his own station. To prove his intentions and his power to effect change in the world, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh describes the noble actions of his followers, their patience and fortitude under trials, and their willingness to be killed rather than to kill. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh briefly recounts the stories of several illustrious believers who suffered martyrdom in the pathway of God. Baha'u'lláh indirectly denounces the Shaykh's acceptance of tyranny by quoting extensively from the Lohe Burhan. This is the tablet of the proof, a tablet written to the Shaykh's father and referring to the Imam Juma of Isfahan, both of whom were responsible for the persecution of many Baha'is. In the passages cited, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh assures these tyrants that, had they realized what they had done, they would have cast themselves into the fire, or would have fled into the mountains rather than exulting in their deeds. He also admonishes them to judge fairly and to recognize that they are condemning him with the same proofs divines have used in ages past to condemn previous manifestations of God. Regardless of their actions and their responses to his plea, he does not fear their cruelty. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh assures us that From the first day whereon the voice of the most sublime pen was raised, betwixt earth and heaven, we offered up our souls and our bodies, and our sons and our possessions, in the path of God. Neither troubles nor the repudiations of the divines can weaken him or still his voice. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh refers to the Shah of Persia, an enemy of the cause, who has closed his eyes to the suffering imposed on the Baha'is by the Muslim clergy. Baha'u'lláh proclaims that it is now the Shah's duty to treat the Baha'is with loving kindness and mercy. He promises that this people, the Baha'is, will show forth nothing that can in any way conflict with the world-adorning views of His Majesty. And finally, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh describes the position of sovereign rulers, explaining that they are the manifestation of God's power, grandeur, and majesty, and as such must be obeyed and honored. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh continues to offer proofs of the truth of his cause to Shaykh Muhammad Taqi Najafi, the son of the wolf. He suggests that if the Shaykh were to consider the events of the past and of recent times, he would turn away from his possessions toward things that are of God and would become an instrument for the exaltation of his word. The Shaykh would also realize that none of the manifestations of God was accepted or acknowledged at the time of his appearance, and that all the manifestations suffered grievously to establish their cause. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh too has suffered dire peril, yet he finds the sweetness of his life comes from the tribulations that have touched him in the path of God, and for those tribulations he is grateful. The remaining passages of the Lawh Burhan, the tablet of the proof, are quoted, and with the aim of drawing the Shaykh closer to God, so that he may arise to aid the cause of Baha'u'lláh. Though the Lawh Burhan was originally addressed to the Shaykh's father, it carries a grave warning to the son as well. Without repentance, retribution is at hand. Abasement of the people, subversion of the Islamic faith, and acts of cruelty against the children of the Apostle of God, the King of martyrs and the beloved of the martyrs, all deserve God's punishment. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh reminds the Shaykh that he has been enabled to hear the melodies of the nightingale of paradise, and to see the signs which God hath sent down, so that his eye might be cheered and his soul be well assured. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh warns him that those who have stirred up mischief and sedition have been and will be afflicted with the retribution which their acts must entail. Baha'u'lláh then describes some activities of those who have sought to create opposition to the cause. Those who have turned away from His Holiness Baha'u'lláh have done so out of attachments to their own idle words, and have thereby shown their objections to Him who is the truth. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh discusses the meaning of divinity and divine presence, explaining He is a manifestation of both in terms of Islamic traditions. Those who neither believe in nor hope to attain God's presence are in error and will suffer in recompense. Nevertheless, those who repudiate or oppose His Holiness Baha'u'lláh have been unable to prevent the Sun of Truth from shining. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh tells the Shaykh that he cannot be excused any longer. He must either recognize Baha'u'lláh or God forbid, arise and deny all the prophets. In these pages ends with a climactic statement from His Holiness Baha'u'lláh. Who else but Baha can speak forth before the face of men, and who else but he can have the power to pronounce that which he was bidden by God, the Lord of hosts? This is on page 121. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh laments that on every side the flame of oppression and tyranny can be discerned. In Tehran, believers have been arrested. In Constantinople and other lands, they have been accused of theft and larceny and made the target of false and slanderous statements. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh compares and contrasts the behavior and intentions of the Baha'is, the loved ones, and of those who are trying to exterminate them. Despite the difficulties surrounding him and the believers, he reaffirms them that whatever occurs in the path of God is nothing but manifest glory and a supreme attainment. For suffering is the means by which God's true lovers are recognized and their station revealed. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh poses a problem for the Shaykh to ponder. Why is it that the Shia sect, which regarded itself as the most learned, the most righteous, and the most pious of all the peoples of the world, hath turned aside in the day of his revelation, and have shown a cruelty such as hath never been experienced? Despite the fact that the divines have been summoned repeatedly to obtain their portion of the ocean of the utterance of him who is the desire of the world. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh reminds the Shaykh that in most of his tablets he has exhorted the divines to recognize his station. He has also warned them not to weigh the Book of God with such standards and sciences as are current amongst them, and has taken them to task for allowing their learning to prevent them from recognizing him who is the object of all knowledge. He offers further proofs of the validity of his station. He has not entered any school nor read any scholarly dissertations, yet none can equal him in vision or insight. Through him every hidden thing hath been revealed. And in answer to protests voiced against him, and in order to offer people another opportunity to accept him, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh has revealed perspicuous verses of clarity and penetrating vision. In these verses, which are filled with rich allusions to earlier scriptures, he names some of the veils that have precluded people from recognizing and turning towards the horizon of certitude, such as vague fancies, vain imaginings, capriciousness, and lack of understanding. And the verses appear in the form of a dialogue between voices of protest, which question the fulfillment of signs that signal the day of God, and the voice of God, which answers that the signs have indeed been fulfilled. Departing very briefly from directly addressing the Shaykh, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh turns his attention to the loved ones, the Baha'is. He admonishes them to fear God and to adorn themselves with trustworthiness and piety and goodly deeds and a praiseworthy character, and he forbids dissension and conflict. He explains the station and value of trustworthiness as the most great ornament of the people of Baha and the supreme instrument for the prosperity of the world. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh resumes addressing the Shaykh and takes up the subject of what will exalt Persia's station, a theme to which he returns later in the book. But the major thrust of His Holiness Baha'u'llah's address is on individual character. Baha'u'lláh states, "Seek the shore of the most great ocean." He states, "To enter the ocean of the unity of God and to give ear unto that which the tongue of might and power hath spoken in the books of God. To acquaint the Shaykh with things of which he was wholly unaware." Baha'u'lláh relates numerous passages from the Bab, the Gospel, Muhammad, and Old Testament prophets, all of which prophesy or allude to Baha'u'llah's coming. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh then reminds the Shaykh of Jesus' saying that he who is the promised one will reveal the things which are to come, and quotes from his own writings to validate that claim. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh assures the concourse of the fair-minded that all that have been sent down hath and will come to pass, word for word upon earth. No possibility is left for anyone either to turn aside or protest. Returning to the ocean imagery he used at the beginning, he asks God that he debar not his servants from turning their faces towards the light of certitude, nor deprive them of the ocean of his signs, that he takes the hand of such as have drowned in the sea of idle fancies, and deliver them by his power and sovereignty. Holiness Baha'u'lláh continues his invitation to the Shaykh to seek the shore of the most great ocean, and to enter the ocean of the unity of God, to give ear unto that which the tongue of might and power hath spoken in the books of God. Speaking through the Shaykh, he now addresses the people of the Bayan. These are the followers of the Bab, who, despite his intention that they should recognize and bear allegiance to him who is the desire of their hearts, and have failed to recognize Baha'u'lláh as the one foretold, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh quotes extensively from the Bab's writings, summoning the Babis to behold ye him with his own eyes, and recognize him by his verses. Baha'u'lláh supports the truth of his own revelation by citing the Bab's prophecies and affirmations of his own station and of the power and potency of his revelation. So Baha'u'lláh warns the Babis not to fall into patterns of the past, refusing even to recognize the manifestation of God as a believer, allowing the proximity of two revelations to veil them from the truth, or being of them who have made mention of the manifestation of the cause of God in the daytime and in the night season, and who, when he through his grace appeared, pronounced against him such a judgment as have provoked the lamentations of the inmates of the kingdom. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh describes the mystical relationship between the Bab and himself, a relationship that existed before all things were created. He quotes the Bab's proclamation of belief in Baha'u'lláh and in his faith, and in his book, and in his testimonies, and in his ways, and in all that proceedeth from him concerning them. The Bab glories in his kinship with Baha'u'lláh, and prides himself on his belief in him. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh also quotes the Bab's repeated declarations of the subordination of his own station and revelation to that of Baha'u'lláh. For all that hath been exalted in the Bayan is but as a ring upon my hand, and I myself am verily but a ring upon the hand of him whom God shall make manifest. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh reiterates the Bab's announcement that those who recognize God on the day of his Baha'u'llah's revelation will have attained the summit of their existence and will have been brought face to face with their beloved and will have recognized to the fullest extent attainable in the world of being the splendor of him who is the desire of their hearts. And those who reject Baha'u'lláh after he reveals himself are shut out as by a veil from God. Among the Babis who rejected His Holiness Baha'u'lláh were a few who sought to do great harm to him, to his cause, and to his followers. These included his half-brother Mirza Yahya, Sayyid Muhammad, also called the Sayyid of Isfahan, and the Antichrist of the Baha'i revelation. Mirza Hadi Dawalat Abadi, whom Mirza Yahya later appointed as his successor, and Baha'u'llah's sister. Baha'u'lláh discusses some of their deeds at length, hoping to make others aware of what came between the True One and his creatures. Baha'u'lláh discloses that those who have turned away from him have schemed many a time and acted deceitfully in diverse ways. They have seized upon every means in order to repudiate the True One. Moreover, they have included murder among their many shameful acts. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh pays homage to several Baha'is, for whose murders they are responsible. Despite the wrongdoings of the heedless, Baha'u'lláh prays on their behalf. In the closing pages of this epistle, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh quotes prophecies and traditions regarding the blessed and honored city of Akka, in order to offer Hadi and others the opportunity to seek a path unto the truth and a road leading unto God. Akka is a city to which God has shown special mercy. Its shores have been deemed above the merit of all other shores, as was the merit of Muhammad above that of all other prophets. Great rewards are promised to those who visit Akka or visit the visitor of Akka. Among the rewards promised are blessings, forgiveness of sin, and protection from the terror of the day of resurrection. Clearly, it is no coincidence that Baha'u'lláh mentions such prophecies, for with his arrival in the city of Akka in 1868 and his imprisonment there in the most great prison, the prophecies and traditions were fulfilled. Thank you, dear friends.